So in a couple of days, the Death Cure movie, which is the final movie in the Maze Runner trilogy, is going to come out in theaters. And so in honor of that, I figured I'd just review all 3 books in the trilogy right now. So let's not waste any time. Let's go.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
So I'll start off with the first book, just because the first book is definitely the one that relies most on the whole mystery element, and it'll be pretty much impossible to talk about the second or third ones without having massive spoilers for the first one. So I'll just start with that. This book's premise, while it isn't the most unique ever, it is really solid, and it does draw you in right away. So the book starts off with this teenager waking up while he's on an elevator of some sort. It's really dark, and it's just rising up, and he doesn't know where he is, or who he is, or how he got there. All he knows is that his name is Thomas. And when the elevator reaches the top, he is in the middle of this area that they call the Glade, and there's a whole bunch of other boys there who were also sent up with the elevator. They also don't know anything except what their own name was, and their Glade is in the middle of this massive, huge, impossibly big maze, which changes every night and is filled with all kinds of traps and these weird monster things that will come out and try to kill you. And so they're mostly just focused on staying in there and trying not to die. But there is one group of them who are called the Maze Runners, really creative name, and they run out into the maze and try and map it and see if they can find a way out. Now, like I said, it's not the most unique idea ever. I've seen similar things done before, and Amnesia is far from an original idea. But, I mean, it's a cliche because it works. I mean, from the first page, you want to know who Thomas is, why he's in this situation, who would have put him and the other Gladers here, why would they put them through all this, what possible reason is there for it. I think I just repeated myself, but whatever, you get the idea. You know, there's just, you want to know what happens. Even if you're only passively interested in the characters and the story itself, the mystery keeps you drawn in, and that alone makes this a pretty fun, good book to read. Change the camera angle. But other than that, there's nothing really spectacular, really. Nothing too bad, I guess, but there's a lot of mediocre stuff. Like, the majority of the main characters don't have a whole lot of personality. They're just kind of, they're teenage boys, and supposedly they're supposed to be really intelligent, but for the most part I didn't really get that. I mean, near the end, when they're starting to focus more on solving the mysteries of the maze, that does show up a little bit more with Thomas and with his other friend Minho, but for the most part they're pretty bland. Like, Thomas at first is a little bit bland, but then partway through the book, when he goes into the maze, that's like, when I first read that, I felt like, oh, okay, that's his moment. Like, this is when he turns into, like, more of a heroic figure, but really he turns into kind of a dick for a while after that. Like, you know, there's another character named Minho who's with him there, and Minho starts crying at one point, and Thomas basically just goes, man, what a fucking baby, in his head. And he's kind of a dick for thinking that, because, you know, he almost died. His friends almost died. He thought he was gonna be eaten, and he didn't, so he's happy. So for most of the book, Thomas is kind of an asshole. For the rest of it, he's kind of bland. But honestly, he's not horrible. He's not like the dude from Prince of Fools, whose name I don't remember, but, you know, he's fine. The other characters, you got, like, this little kid named Chuck, who is a little kid named Chuck, and that's about it. And then you got a guy named Albie, and he's the leader, I guess. That's about it, really. There's not much to him. And then there's the girl, who's named Teresa. Really, the only 2 other characters of note are Minho, who I already mentioned, and he's actually pretty alright. You know, he's in this, he meets Thomas, and they become, like, loyal. He becomes his loyal friend, and they really become bros, you know, that like you feel the camaraderie between them actually, and that continues through the second and third books as well. So Minho's pretty solid character, and then you got the main villain, and he's just he's just kind of dumb. We're gonna forget about him. And even if you're not the biggest fan of the characters, the story in this is pretty fast paced. You know, like it doesn't really focus on the Glade all that much, to be honest, which is a little annoying because you never get really a feeling of how their society is supposed to operate, but, you know, whatever. And, you really start to unravel what's going on a lot more quickly than I initially thought it would be. Because when I first started this, I had the impression that the entire trilogy would just be them trying to get out of the maze. No, they figure out a lot of what's going on pretty quickly, and you know, there's always monster attacks or something to distract you from the more annoying stuff. So overall, this book's pretty solid, has a great cliffhanger ending, it has blandish characters, but you know, the story and the mystery are really good, and honestly, I'd recommend it to you. And if you're worried about spoilers for the first one, you just stop watching now because I'm going to move on to the second one. So the Scorch Trials picks up not long after the Maze Runner ends, and it turns out that the Gladers, they thought they escaped at the end, but they're still captured by Wicked. And as an aside, it is really weird how the virus is supposed to work here. Like, it affects your mind, so they're looking at people's minds to figure out how to not do it instead of figuring out how to fight viruses like we've been doing for decades. I don't know. It really doesn't make sense. And while that did bother me, it's fiction, you know? You have to look past some scientific inaccuracies in fiction sometimes. Like, if that bothers you to the point where you just think, well, this is stupid and I don't want to read anymore, I get it. But for me, it wasn't too big a deal. And beyond that, the second book is kind of similar to the first one, just with less mystery in it. You know, there's some, sure, but for the most part, it's just them trying to survive all the horrible shit that gets thrown at them. Like, yeah, the Scorch is pretty bad, honestly. Like, it's not just a little bit bad, and it's built up like crazy, and then it's a bit of a letdown. Like, it's really horrible. Like, it's hot, they have crazy storms going all over, you have Wicked setting up traps, you have the crazy cranks that are in there, which, as another aside, in the movie, the cranks were basically turned into zombies, which annoyed me a little bit, because in the books, they were still people, they were just insane and had pieces of them rotting off, so they could still talk, and they could think to an extent, and it was, it was more horrifying for that very reason, because they were more human, whereas in the films they're just like these weird dead creature things, and they have a lot less personality to them. But, you know, whatever, I'm here to talk about the books, and in the books the cranks are horrifying and scary, and they make the whole thing a lot more intense than it normally would have been. And something I should really mention is that about 2/3 through this book, Thomas becomes a much, much better character. Because, like, for most of the first book and most of this one, he's really just focused on keeping himself and his friends alive. You know, he doesn't like Wicked, certainly, but he also doesn't seem to really hold it against them all that much, because he's thinking, okay, most of the world has been destroyed by this disease, and they need to find a cure for it. So, okay, I don't like being in this situation, but I want to help. But then, as more and more shit gets thrown at him and more of his friends keep dying, he just starts to hate them more and more and think that what they're doing is wrong. You know, he specifically says at one point that it doesn't matter if it's to save the world, torturing kids like this is wrong, and it's better to let humanity die, which you might disagree with, but that's certainly an interesting thing to think. And tying into that, he just gets really fed up with people's shit, you know? Like, for a while he was just going along with the flow, trying to mediate, keep people from fighting, but then about 2/3 through, he turns into a dick again, but this time the people who he's a dick to kind of deserve it, because they basically kidnapped him again, and so he's just constantly talking shit on them, saying, "Hey, you're an asshole, fuck you, blah 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 blah." And so because of that, Thomas gets a lot more personality, and his morality and all that becomes just way more interesting than it was before. So if in the first book you were kind of bothered by Thomas being a little bit bland, then this one should fix that for you, although it does take a little while. And the other characters get some development too, which is kind of impressive when you consider it, but not that impressive, because even though there's like 20 Gladers that escape at the end of the book, most of them don't actually get names at all. Like, they don't even say, "Oh yeah, that's that guy, and he has this weird personality trait," and we don't really go into it any more than that. Like, no, they just don't have names. They exist. But, you know, the ones that do have names get a little bit more development, a little more personality, and so that's actually pretty nice. And then the ending, you know, they have a really cool action climax, and then it drops off another cliff, and you're left immediately wanting to read the third book again. So in terms of cliffhanger ending, this one's great, just like the first one. So now for the Death Cure, which, in my opinion, is the best in the series by a pretty huge margin. In fact, as far as enders to trilogies go, this is honestly one of my favorite endings to any trilogy ever. And it's mostly just because of the very end, which I'm not going to really talk about at all. I'm just going to say it's really good, and I didn't see it coming in the slightest. The rest of the book, though, it's good, you know, just like the rest of the trilogy. It's, you know, it's Thomas trying to save his friends again, not really trying to take down Wicked so much, which I thought was a nice change of pace, because in most books like this, it would be like, I'm going to get revenge, or I'm going to destroy Wicked so that they can't do this to anyone else. In this, it's really just Thomas trying to rescue his friends and take them away and save them all, which, yeah, that's nice. That's a very simple motivation, and it carries him through the whole book. And, you know, there's a couple of nice action scenes, and this is the first one that really takes place in civilization, so we're actually seeing how the world has adapted since the solar flares hit and since the virus got out, which I believe is also called the flare. Everyone, again, the characters, like I said, they started off pretty bland, but by the time you get to this one, most of them are actually fairly good. You know, they undergo quite a bit of development. They've been hurt a lot by the world. Some of them get like severe depression and post-traumatic stress. Some of them get really angry. Some people just don't even know what to do anymore, so they just start lashing out and destroying everything they can. And that, I think, was really good, because it's a really that's just how some people react to that. That's pretty realistic. And beyond that, I don't want to say much because of spoilers, but, you know, again, just like the other ones, the story is pretty quick-paced. It didn't have any gigantic plot holes that I can think of, and there wasn't really any mystery, but, you know, that's we're kind of past that point by now, you know? We already have all the major questions answered. Now it's just wanting to see Thomas and company survive. And like I said, the ending's great. So overall, this is kind of a weird trilogy, because it starts off kind of meh, you know, not bad. I think it's pretty solid, but not amazing. And then it gets better as time goes on, and the third one is honestly great. So overall, I would definitely recommend this if you're into any sort of mystery action sort of stories, you know, or if the premise to this sounds interesting to you at all, just go ahead and check it out. And if the first book annoys you, like I said, it does get better, but if it's too much, then yeah, maybe it's just not for you.